The Cherry Saison we brewed a few weeks ago during that Brew Day live stream is ready to drink. Stick around and I'll tell you all about it. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Larry here again today to talk about the Cherry Saison that we brewed a few weeks ago. If you remember the live stream Brew Day and Barbecue Extravaganza that we had a few weeks ago with Mike and Paul from Homebrewing TV, Clay from Jaded Brewing, and my very own brother Chad, if you recall. And some neighbors were there, of course, too, right? Here to help brew and eat and drink, and that was an awesome time. So I thought I'd do a follow-up video on that Brew Day to show you the end result, because that Brew Day was only Brew Day. It didn't involve the fermentation aspect, which is where the cherry comes into play with the Saison. Now that Brew Day live stream was just the base beer, sort of like the background, sort of like the canvas, if you're into painting and all, right? To give sort of a background for the cherries that were going to be added later, the star of the show, so to speak, the cherries, that is. So that Brew Day was awesome. We had a great time again, but that was just a base beer. The real work came into play when we went to go about doing the cherry edition later on. So for those who are curious, I can show you a close-up of the beer, the end result. It's got a nice red hue to it. All right, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but I will probably do an overlay anyway for you up close. But it turned out really well. It's pretty light-bodied, which is great for a summer beer. If I had to do it over again, if you recall that Brew Day live stream, I got a lower gravity than I thought I would because of maybe some miscalcs or missteps along the way. So it's a bit thinner than I planned on. And I also went back and looked at my notes, and I missed an important ingredient, the lactic acid addition, to make it a little bit more tart. I missed that in that recipe on the Brew Day with all the distractions we had, right, going on. But even without that, even with the lower gravity, you still taste the cherries. It's refreshing. It's a great time of year right now, being near the end of the summer. It's still kind of hot outside, and it's a delicious beer. Which just enough cherry flavor, not overpowering, not too little. You taste the cherries, but it's not strong. I may reevaluate if I want a stronger cherry flavor next time. Maybe I'll add more cherries. But honestly, I put a lot of cherries in this recipe. I think I put in, let's see here, 6.5 pounds or more of fresh cherries. So to me, that seemed like a lot. But in hindsight, maybe I want to bump it up next time if I want the more heavier cherry flavor. But really, it's quite refreshing just the way it is, too. Now, so on to the second half of that beer recipe. Remember, we covered during that 5-hour or so long live stream, we went through the whole brewing process where we added a variety of malts, some pale malt, some wheat malt, and some Vienna malt. And we added some hops in there. We added some Galena and Hallertauer hops at different points in there, which is just fine. I didn't want a heavy hop note in it. Again, I wanted to have a background beer, sort of a canvas, a blank canvas for the cherries to come through. So that was my intent. Just enough bitterness to take the malt sugariness out of the beer and have a very sort of a neutral beer there, right? So what you didn't see was what happened after Brew Day. So let's go into that detail. I fermented it with a pack. Well, okay, let me back up one notch here. I did split that batch. It was a 10-gallon batch, but I split it with Mike, right? Paul and Mike, I mean, and they went back and took half of it with. So everything on this recipe here is for a full-size 10-gallon batch. So consider it cutting it in half for a 5-gallon batch for yourself. So I will speak in terms of a 5-gallon batch going forward, since that's what I did for the rest of the recipe after Brew Day. So first up, what yeast did I use? Well, it was the Lallemand Belle Saison yeast, because I was wanting to brew a Saison. I wanted something with a little bit of a tartness to it, and this did provide that. You may or may not recall, about a year ago exactly, I did another fruit beer called, I think it was Larry's Berries, where I did a mixed berry and a raspberry beer in one video, and I used that same yeast then, and I loved it. So I'm using it again here. Same base recipe as that fruit recipe too. So not much shouldn't have changed, unless maybe I changed the hops a little bit. But again, just enough to take the bitterness or the sweetness out of the beer. So aside from the yeast, I did some water additions to boost my calcium chloride ratio a little bit up closer to a more balanced thing. I have Lake Michigan water, Chicagoland here. It's very soft water. I had to add a little bit of, what was it, calcium and some Epsom salt to bring it up. And I was supposed to have added a lactic acid ingredient addition too as well, but with everything going on again in that brew day, totally forgot about that addition. But next time I will definitely include that. So now, let's deep dive into the cherries, shall we? Because that's where the nuts and bolts are and what differentiates this beer from others. And what I did was, well, let me look at my notes here, right? Because it's been a few weeks. But what I did was do a base fermentation with the Lallemand yeast in one of my fermenters. It's just let it ferment out for a course of several days. It might have been 4 or 5 days for all I know now in hindsight, but once it started to tail off, the fermentation started to slow, the bubbles slowed. I decided to do a transfer to a new vessel just to get the beer off the sediment, the trub down at the bottom of the fermenter, because what happens is, for those who've never done fruit beers, is that when you add fruit to a fermenter, all that new sugar restarts fermentation and off it goes again, and it starts churning, and all that sediment you had settle out now might get churned up into the beer. So to avoid all that, I racked it to another vessel, and then I decided to add my cherries. But before I could add my cherries, I had to prepare the cherries. So what I did is went to the local store, bought 6.5 pounds of cherries, and I pasteurized them. And how I did that was kind of cool. I actually did it in a sous vide bath at about 150 degrees or so, which is right around the pasteurization temperature I wanted. Now, the reason why I did sous vide, because I wanted to seal in the cherries. I didn't want to boil them and lose some of the juices in the water, right? And some people use potassium metabisulfite or sodium metabisulfite to help suppress the baddies. I could have done that, but since I've been into sous vide cooking as another side hobby of mine, I thought I'd try to combine that with the brewing hobby and give that a shot. So what I did is put all the cherries in a sous vide bath for 150 degrees for up to an hour, and I had to make sure, it took a while to get the cherries up to that temperature. So you really only need about 15-20 minutes probably of actual 150 plus degree temperature to get there, but it took a while for it to come to an equilibrium, because I put room temperature cherries. It takes a while for it to get up to 150, so I gave it well over an hour, and then I let them cool down and threw them in the freezer. And the reason why I threw them in the freezer was to help break up the skins a little bit, to help release some of the juices. It also helps with some of the suppressing some of the germs, but that shouldn't have mattered since I pasteurized it. Now, last year when I did that fruit beer, all I did was use frozen frozen berries. Those berries were not pasteurized, and it ended up giving that beer a very nice, complex, tart, slightly sour profile. I didn't get that here because I did take a little bit of precaution to, again, pasteurize, freeze, thaw, and that really suppressed a lot of the baddies. So what I taste in this beer here is really more of the actual yeast itself, more than any other wild contribution like a lactobacillus or any of these other wild yeast or bacteria out there. I think I got a pretty good job at suppressing them. So was that good, bad? I don't know. I like the tangy tartness and the complexity of last year's fruit beer a little better. So maybe I overdid the sanitation. Maybe next time I'll back off on some of it and let the wild beasties run wild next time. But for what I did, this is a very smooth, clean, only slightly tart beer. So keep that in mind. Maybe next time I will as well, and maybe skip the pasteurization and just go right to the freezing, just to give a little bit more of the wild character back into the fruit. So I thawed the cherries about the day before. I was going to put them in the secondary fermenter. I broke it up into 2 batches because of the size of the bags I had. I had 2 nylon mesh bags that I got at the local homebrew store. I sanitized those in some Star San, sanitized the container I was going to use to put the cherries into the bags in with Star San, put the cherries in each of the bags, tied it up really well, and added it to the secondary fermenter along with the beer. So that fermentation picked up again, let it go about another week and a half. So total fermentation time was about 2.5 weeks. I wanted to let the fruit settle out as much as I can, and that beer looked delicious. I mean, it turned a nice dark cherry red. I mean, it was, my mouth was watering just watching it sit there, waiting to be carbonated, right? So I got right to the task, got it carbonated, waited another week. And I tend to cold crash in my keg. I know a lot of you cold crash in the fermenters. I don't have the capacity to cold crash a fermenter. My fermenters are kind of large and don't fit in my little fridge as easily as they do for some of you guys. So I tend to cold crash in my keg, in the kegerator, and then I just pour off the first pint or so of anything that comes out as sediment or solids, and that's done. And it looks great ever since. And that's how I do it. And that's my short overview of how I made my cherry saison. I hope you appreciate it. Give me that thumbs up. Put any comments down below if you'd like to ask any detailed questions. I'll try to get back to them in detail for you. And other than that, Prost, cheers, skull, enjoy. I am. This is an excellent beer. Talk to y'all later.